Svelte is a JavaScript UI framework for building interactive web applications. It's just like other UI frameworks like Vue or React, but its main differentiator is it tries to compile your components at build time or before your app runs in the browser rather than at runtime while running your app in the browser. A framework like React uses a diffing algorithm to compute the difference between what's on the page and what should be on the page in order to determine what to render while your app is running. Svelte already knows this before you even load the app, therefore making it faster because it skips that step. SvelteKit is an app framework for building high-performance web applications using the Svelte UI framework. It comes pre-built with features to help you solve routing, server-side rendering, data fetching, TypeScript, deployments, and many more. To test the features, you're going to create a fully working user registration form using SvelteKit, Tailwind CSS, and SQLite database. The fastest way to start building a SvelteKit app is to run the npm create svelte command. This SvelteKit startup template CLI comes with 3 pre-built templates: a fully running Svelte demo app, a bare-bones skeleton project to get you started with a new Svelte app, and another skeleton project for creating Svelte libraries. We're going to go with the bare-bones skeleton project. There's also options for enabling TypeScript, which you'll not use for this project. ESLint for code linting, Prettier for code formatting, Playwright for end-to-end tests, and vtest for unit tests. Next is installing dependencies and running the dev server. In our new Svelte app, the main concept we need to grasp is we add pages to our app by creating files for them in the roots directory, and each page is a Svelte component. The roots are identified by the plus prefix. A plus page.svelte component defines a page in your app using SvelteKit's file system-based router. We can create multiple folders in the roots folder which have a plus page.svelte component to show that the folder is a root. Let's use this bit of knowledge to create a user registration page for our app. First, we'll create a register page in the roots directory by adding a register folder with a plus page.svelte file. Next, we'll create a register form with username, email, password confirmation, and register button fields. You can see the register page if you visit the register root on the browser. This doesn't look very good style-wise, so to make styling easier, we can add Tailwind CSS utility framework. First, we install the Tailwind dependencies, which include Tailwind CSS, PostCSS, and autoprefixer packages. We then initialize the Tailwind configuration settings by running npx init tailwind.config.cjs. Next thing is adding .svelte files and other file types to the list of template paths in the Tailwind config so that Tailwind can find and compile the CSS in the files. We then enable processing Vite component stylebox as PostCSS by adding the Vite preprocess plugin in Svelte config. We then create an app.css file and import the most important Tailwind directives that will make it work in our pages. This will make it possible to add Tailwind utility classes to our HTML elements. Also, we need to ensure that this CSS file is loaded for all our pages. To do that, we create a plus layout.svelte file at the root of our roots folder and import the app.css files here. This slot tag is where all child components that use this layout will be rendered, so all the pages will have access to Tailwind. Next, we'll add some Tailwind utility classes to our register form to make it look a little better. First, we'll center the form on the page by adding flex and flexcore so that we have the register text in one column instead of two. Justify center and item center to center the register text and form, and finally add hscreen to make our container height fill the whole screen and therefore center the form. We can also make the register text 3 times larger and make the font bolder. We can also make the form a white card with a rounded border with shadows and add some padding and margin for the child elements. The next step is styling our label so that we can actually see the text inputs. To space the text inputs, we can wrap the inputs with a div with a bottom margin. We can then place the labels on their own row with a block class, make them gray with a smaller bold font, and add an extra bottom margin. For the input box, we can give it a shadow, rounded border, full width, bottom, top, right, and left margins, make the text gray, increase the line height, and disable the default outline when focused. We can then add the same styling for the email, password, and confirm fields. Finally, we can wrap the button in a centered flex container, give it a light blue color which becomes darker when hovered, make the font bolder, add some padding, make it rounded, and disable outline when focused. Now that our form looks better, the next step is adding form submit logic. The first step is giving our form a method. we'll give it a post method since you're going to save this data to our database. If we fill in some data and click register, the page will just refresh and nothing will happen. We need to add a handler that will receive this form input. To do this, we create a +page.server.js file next to our +page.svelte file that will handle server-side requests. Inside this file, we export an action object that will contain different actions that will handle form elements in our page. For our page, we can add a create action that will receive user details and register new users. Each action gets passed a request object that we can use to get the submitted form values through the request.formData method. For these form data values to work, you need to make sure that each of the input elements has a name prop. This is what is used to serialize the form data. We also need to point this form to our create action we just added. We do this by adding an action prop to the form with the value being the register root followed by a question mark and a /, then the name of the action. Now that we've hooked up the form and the action, we can handle validation. The first step of form validation is using the browser inbuilt tools. For input elements, there's a required prop that you can pass to ensure empty values are not submitted. So we can add those to all the input elements. If we try to submit the form with empty values, the browser will prevent form submissions until all values are filled. This is just the first step. We can pass over more validation work to the server in our create action. For a start, we can check if the first password and the confirmed password are equal, and if not, stop submission and return an error. Here, we are returning an action failure object with the status code and error message. This helper method is built into SvelteKit. Over on +page.svelte file, we need a way to display form submit error messages. We can access the action response from the form prop, which is automatically passed to the page after a form is submitted. Whatever we return from the create action will be available on this form prop. We can then display the error message to the UI if it exists. If we try creating an account and enter different passwords for the password and confirm password fields, we'll get an error message. This means our server form validation works. Now that error validation works, the next step for us is making our register form work by saving the data to a real database. We're going to use the SQLite database for this, so we'll install the SQLite npm package, which will be the database client, and SQLite 3 package, which is an SQLite database driver for Node.js. A bonus feature of SQLite 3 package is it supports database migrations. Next, let's set up the migrations for creating our users table. We'll save the migrations in an SQL file in migrations folder. In the migrations, we create a users table in the up section for when the migration is run and drop it in the down section for when the migration is reversed. Next, we need to have a central file to access and manipulate our SQLite database. We'll use the file libserverdatabase.js for this. In this file, we can export a getDatabase function that will open our database and return an instance of it. We store the database instance outside of the function so that we don't create a new instance every time the getDatabase function is called. We'll also be storing the database in a database.db file at the root of our project. We'll also need to add a CLI tool to run our migrations. Here, we'll get the database instance we just created and call the migrate function that ships with the SQLite 3 library we installed. We then print a success message if everything succeeds. We can run this script by typing node CLI migrate.js in the terminal. If all goes well, we'll see the success message printed and a database.db file created for us at the root of our project. We've now set up our database successfully. Let's go back to hooking our register functionality. In libserverdatabase.js file, we can add a create user function that inserts a new user to our database. We also use the bcrypt module to hash the user password so that we don't store insecure plain text passwords in our database. We finally return the ID of the newly created user so that we can use it later to check for user registration status. We can now call the function in our +page.server.js file after the validation logic. We then save the user ID as a cookie using the cookie object automatically provided by SvelteKit, and then finally redirect the user to the home page after successful registration. If we try to register a new user in the page, we should be redirected to the home page after clicking register. Our registration page now fully works. Our last step is to get user details on the home page. To do that, we first need to have a function that gets a user by their ID from the database. So we add a getUserById function in libserver database.js util. We then need to have a way to call this function and pass the data over to our home page. To do that, we create a +page.server.js file next to the +page.svelte file for the home page root. We then add a load function which will get the user ID from the cookie we saved while registering and then fetch the full user from the database. We then return an object containing that user. This object will be passed as a prop to the +page.svelte page in a data object prop. We can access this user prop in the root +page.svelte file via export late data. Finally, we can provide a customized greeting message for user by accessing the data.user.username property. If you refresh the page, you should see a custom welcome message with the username you provided during registration. Our simple register page is now done. I hope this video provided a few insights on how SvelteKit works and how to integrate several components like database, form validation, and styles in your app. You can find a link to the full code in the description. Thanks for watching.